Good evening. I was just curious, can you talk a little bit about when you feel the screenplay is ready? I know that you know, especially you, Cherien, you talked about, you know, you spent years developing the idea and eventually writing the script. I'm just curious, when do you feel like you can make the call to actually start pre-production on the screenplay and say this is as good as it's going to get so I can get started on the movie?
Wow, that's a tough question. I mean, on some level, the screenplay is never ready. I get to be the pessimist now. That's a really hard question. I think you have to, you know, I think that what we do as writers is we get really lazy because we get tired. And so I think the most important thing you need to do is to really be realistic and to listen to those voices in your head that say, this isn't quite right, this isn't quite right. And one thing that I started to do on Amreeka was that I read that script so many, like dozens of times. I don't know why. I just would torture myself by, it was just like I felt like I needed to know every word of that story, of the script, every punctuation mark. And I started to realize that there were scenes that I liked better than other scenes. And so and it was funny because I think after like the 20th draft, I was like, well, fuck it, I'm just gonna keep writing forever. Like I'm gonna give up the idea that it's ever gonna be done or ever gonna be ready. And and I started to get into it like, okay, I'm gonna make it better. And when I realized that I had scenes that I like better than others, then I was like, well, I want this scene to be as good as that other scene that I really love. And that, you know, it's sort of like, I don't know if it's just ways that you kind of psych yourself or, you know, get yourself excited to dive back in and do the torturous work of rewriting. But that was, you know, that was something that I did, and it was a way for me to gauge whether or not I felt like I was ready to shoot something. I wanted every scene to really be as good as my favorite scene in the script. And you know, and you have to really think big picture as well and overall and about each character arc and each relationship and just make sure that you've vigorously worked them as much as possible. And I think it's helpful too to get feedback from other people and to, you know, give people the script and be like, you know, what do you take away from it? What is it about to you? You know, what are your thoughts? And just, you know, when you start getting the feedback of, it's great, I think you're ready. Or, you know, you get little notes, then you know you're getting closer and closer, and I think that that's also a good gauge.
Well, I mean, it's a craft as much as it is an art, you know, screenwriting. And there are, I hate to say this, but there are sort of rules, I mean, not rules, rules is the wrong way to be, you adhere to the rules and you wrote a good script, that's not the way it works. But, I mean, narrative is almost like, it's about sequential linkage. So when you're working on something and it seems to have a cumulative impact, it's very hard to say because it's very, even in the editing process, you find yourself kicking yourself for the errors that you made in the script stage. So I think it's a big mistake when people say, I read that script, it was amazing. It almost always is a bad script because the script, no, it's true. You don't look at a blueprint and go, that's the greatest building. You know what I mean? It's a very bizarre form, and it has to do with how much, and I suppose this is another way of putting what you said, except a little less eloquently, which is, in a sense, writing is almost like a method process, for me anyway. You know the way people make fun of method actors? Hey, the guy has to so method, he has to do things. Well, the writer has to feel the character he or she is writing very deeply. And if I find myself, if I haven't contemplated a specific character, what the character wants, what the character's about, so forth, I always find if I give my script to my wife or a friend of mine to read, they're like, yeah, that character is not really, they can always tell. So I guess what I would say is the script is ready when I have attempted to fulfill the commitment to all the characters in the script, or at least as many as I can. There's always a bit player that you can't do that with. To commit myself emotionally to all the characters, and then finally, of course, that the structure of the thing seems to make sense in a narrative way. And this is written about by, you know, Sid Field and all those guys, and I hate to say this, but to a degree it's true, that there is, in narrative anyway, that there's a structure that I like to adhere to. So it's those two things in concert. Doesn't really serve a glib answer your question.
My experience is a kind of dialectical one, which you write something and you, I guess you just want to passionately believe that it's really good, And then you give it to some people to read, and they say some things, and they state your sort of deepest fears, and then you go back and you confront that, and you go, oh, okay, that wasn't good, or it certainly wasn't good enough. And then you go and you use that as the antithesis, and then you start working on this new draft, and you learn certain things, and often you forget other really crucial things in that second draft, and sometimes it ends up being a weird bastardization, bad thing, and then you'll get finally to something that you feel is it, and then that will reveal itself not to be it either, and you'll read that, and I got to this draft that I thought, finally, after 8 months, and then I read it again, I thought, oh my God, it just sucks. And then, you really look for an injection of something, and for me, in that case, it was like before I went and wrote again, I went back and read Chekhov for a week or 2 weeks solid, went back and read Three Sisters and Cherry Orchard and Uncle Vanya and Siegel again, and then started writing and tried to figure out, worked on the tone, and then you went back and do passes for each of the characters. Mm-hmm. But the real interesting, then what happens is somebody goes, okay, good, we're gonna make it, and then you hang on desperately to that thing, even to what's wrong. Because you think, God, if I change what's wrong, they could take the money away, and I secretly know, about this shortcoming, but maybe no one's catching it. I don't have a better idea, and I don't want to introduce this, topic. I don't want to, take this all apart. But happily, on this movie, there was a real problem in the third act, and everybody else participates in that silence. Because nobody wants to lose their job, nobody wants to go home, nobody wants to say, the third act doesn't work, But in this case, happily, there was a couple of people who were just kind of curmudgeon-y and nasty who would actually say to me, yeah, I don't know, I never really after page 80, I just am bored. So finally I heard that enough that I still wasn't going to change it until I was told we don't have enough money to do the stuff in the third act. And this was about 6 weeks before we shot, maybe less. And just simply because we couldn't afford it, I went back and cut. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie, but it used to be, when Tolstoy, Sophia goes to the train station where Tolstoy dies, the James McAvoy character went to pursue his love in Moscow, and he didn't go to the train station at the end. And because we couldn't afford to do Moscow, I had to. For some reason, I held on to the fact that character wasn't actually there at the end. It was like I'd changed and cheated on so much stuff in terms of facts, but that was a fact that I didn't want to violate. Who knows why that goes on in your head? Anyway, once I sent him to the train station, all of a sudden, the thing just kind of lined up in the third act in a much, much more positive way. And so honestly, it was just pure chance that, we just ran out of money, and that saved me. Tolstoy would love that. He'd say, "You're saved by your poverty." That's great. So,
Well, I think.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I've talked enough.
I was just going to say one other indication, I think, is when you can, at least for me looking back, when I could really clearly articulate what the story was about was when I knew that I was getting really close. And it's funny because I said, that I was reading the script over and over, and I think that it was a way for me to kind of breathe in the whole story all at once, was for me to read it through without stopping and to kind of take it all in at once. And that was, I think looking back, it was actually really helpful to do that. I think that's, really being able to clearly articulate is incredibly important.